But why, Mary? Why would she do this to me? My daughter-in-law Jessica sobbed, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with a grief I knew all too well. I have only ever tried to be her friend. I sat beside her on my sofa, stroking her hair, my own heart a cold, hard knot of anger. Outside, the autumn sun cast a gentle golden light over my peaceful garden, a world away from the ugly, vicious war that had been declared within the walls of my own family. I looked at this good, kind woman, whose only crime was her own contentment, and I gave her the only answer that made any sense. "Because you are happy, my dear," I said softly. And to an envious heart, another person's happiness is the most unforgivable of sins. My dear friend, have you ever been the target of a jealousy so profound it defies logic? Have you seen the goodness in your own life become a reason for another's hatred? It is a bewildering and painful experience. If you understand this, or if you have ever witnessed this poison at work in a family, then please, stay with me. Your support through a like or a subscription is a quiet act of solidarity. And as I read your comments and see the cities you call home, I am reminded that goodness and decency are things worth fighting for, all over the world. The story begins in a time of rare and precious peace. It was nearly 3 years after the terrible ordeal with my granddaughter Emily, and a year after the final public schism at Anna's wedding. My family, or what remained of it, had healed into a new and stronger shape. The constant, simmering anxiety of waiting for the next betrayal from David or Eleanor was gone. Our smaller gatherings were filled with a genuine, easy warmth. The most beautiful transformation was in my son, Samuel. The man who had once been consumed by a bitter, resentful envy had, through the crucible of that awful Christmas and with the steadfast love of his wife, Jessica, become the man I always knew he could be. He was a devoted husband, an attentive father, and a loving son. Their marriage, which had once been so strained, was now the strongest in the family, a testament to the power of forgiveness and hard-won peace. Jessica, my brave, loyal Jessica, was radiant with a quiet, contented happiness. It was this very happiness that planted the seeds of the next war. The antagonist in this story is another of my daughters-in-law, Veronica. She is the wife of my son, Michael, a quiet, gentle man who, unlike Samuel, had never had a dramatic fall or a grand redemption. He was simply average. And in a family of such high drama, their quiet average life, with its average struggles and its average successes, had left Veronica with a constant, low-grade feeling of being overlooked. She watched the intense loyalty between myself and Jessica. She saw the profound journey Samuel had taken, and she felt invisible. Her heart began to curdle with envy. The inciting incident, the spark that lit the fuse, was the celebration we threw for Samuel and Jessica's 25th wedding anniversary. It was a beautiful, heartfelt affair in my garden. Samuel gave a speech to his wife that brought tears to every eye, speaking of how her love had been his anchor in the darkest of storms. I, in my own toast, called Jessica the moral compass of our family. I saw Veronica watching the scene from the edge of the patio. Her smile was a tight, brittle thing, her eyes like chips of glass. In that moment, her mask of polite family affection slipped, and I saw a look of such profound, curdling resentment that it sent a literal chill down my spine. She was not celebrating their joy. She was cataloging it as a personal injustice. In the weeks that followed, her poison began to seep out in small, passive-aggressive remarks. If Jessica brought a beautiful homemade cake to Sunday dinner, Veronica would say, "Oh, Jessica, you're a marvel. I don't know how you find the time. My life is just so hectic, I'm lucky if I can manage something store-bought." The comment was framed as a compliment, but its true meaning was clear. You have it so easy. My life is so much harder. She began to focus her whispers on the most vulnerable part of our family's new peace, Samuel's past insecurities. She knew his journey of redemption was still a fragile one. She decided to destroy Jessica's reputation, and in doing so, destroy the foundation of their happiness. Her weapon was a vicious, calculated lie. She began with my daughter Margaret, the most easily influenced of my children. She confided in her, her voice full of false concern. "I feel so terrible even saying this," she'd whispered. "But I saw Benjamin and Jessica having lunch together downtown last week. Just the two of them, and the way he was looking at her, the way she was laughing. It just felt so intimate. I'm probably being completely silly, but it made me uncomfortable. You won't say anything, will you? I would just die if Samuel ever found out. It was a lie of diabolical genius. She chose Benjamin, my gentle artist, a man whose kindness could easily be twisted into something illicit. She created a secret, planted it, and then stepped back to watch it grow. The poison spread faster than I could have imagined. Margaret told her husband, who mentioned it to another brother, and soon the whispers had reached their target. Samuel. He did not explode. He did not confront Jessica. Instead, the old insecurities, the old feelings of being the overlooked, foolish one, came creeping back. A cold, suspicious quiet fell over their marriage. He became distant, questioning her every move, his eyes full of a doubt that was eating him alive. Jessica, heartbroken and bewildered, had no idea what she had done to deserve it. I saw it happening. I saw the light beginning to dim in Jessica's eyes, and the old, familiar shadow of resentment returning to my son Samuel's face. I did not yet know the source of the poison, but I knew my family was sick again. A new war had begun, and this time the enemy was an invisible whisper, the most dangerous kind of foe. The beautiful, hard-won peace in my son Samuel's marriage began to fray, thread by thread. He became quiet, watchful. The easy laughter he once again shared with his wife was replaced by a tense, guarded silence. He started questioning her about small things, a phone call she took, a lunch with a friend. Jessica, my brave Jessica, was bewildered. She came to me one afternoon, her eyes shadowed with a familiar pain I prayed I would never see in them again. We sat at my kitchen table, a place that had become a sanctuary for so many of our family's sorrows. "He's like a stranger again, Mary," she whispered, her voice trembling as she recounted his sudden, inexplicable jealousy. "He's suspicious, cold. Last night he asked me why Benjamin and I were suddenly so chummy. Benjamin, it was so ugly, so out of nowhere. I feel like that bitter, wounded man I lived with for years is coming back, and I am so scared." Her words gave me the first solid clue. The poison, whatever its source, was specifically about Jessica and my gentle artist son, Benjamin. I knew I had to move with the delicate precision of a surgeon. My first step was to speak with Benjamin. I found him in his studio, the air thick with the smell of oil paint and turpentine. I asked him, as gently as I could, about his friendship with Jessica. His confusion was absolute and genuine. "Lunch?" he said, his brow furrowed. "Yes, we had lunch a few weeks ago. She's commissioning a painting from me for her office, a surprise for Samuel. We talked about the composition. That's it. Why?" When I told him of Samuel's sudden jealousy, a look of horrified disgust washed over his face. "That's insane," he breathed. "Who would start such a filthy, ridiculous lie?" "That," I said, my own heart growing heavy, "is what I intend to find out." I knew the rumor had to have a source, a patient zero who had first unleashed this sickness into our family. My mind sorted through the possibilities, and I knew I had to speak with my daughter Margaret. She was a good-hearted woman, but she was impressionable and, I suspected, lonely, which made her fertile ground for the confidences of a manipulator. I called her on the pretense of asking about her children. I steered the conversation gently, my voice full of a casual concern. "I'm a bit worried about Samuel and Jessica," I said lightly. "He seems to have gotten some foolish idea in his head about her and Benjamin." There was a panicked silence on the other end of the line, and I knew I had found my mark. "Oh, Mother," she stammered, her voice a guilty whisper. "I probably shouldn't say anything. Veronica made me promise." "Veronica?" I asked, my voice calm, a cold certainty taking root in my heart. Margaret crumbled, as I knew she would. "She confided in me," she rushed to explain. "She said she saw them and that it looked too intimate. She seemed so worried, so upset for Samuel. She said she felt it was her duty to say something, but she didn't want to cause trouble." "I never thought—" "I know you didn't, my dear," I said, cutting off her panicked excuses. "You have a good heart, but you must learn that not everyone who confides in you is a friend." I hung up the phone, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Veronica, the quiet one, the one who watched from the shadows with a tight, polite smile. The serpent had a name. Her campaign, now that I saw it clearly, escalated. Seeing the success of her poisonous whispers, she grew bolder. The final proof of her malice came at my annual spring garden party. It had always been a joyful, informal kickoff to the season. And Jessica was always my co-host, her lemon and rosewater layer cake the celebrated centerpiece of the dessert table. This year, Veronica insisted on helping in the kitchen. I watched with a new cold clarity as she moved around my familiar space. And then I saw it. While Jessica was outside, arranging chairs, Veronica was beside the beautiful three-tiered cake Jessica had just finished icing. With a small, furtive movement, she took the salt shaker from the counter, uncapped it, and with a slight smile, emptied a significant amount into the bowl of leftover buttercream frosting before giving it a quick, casual stir. A few minutes later, she approached Jessica, her face a mask of concern. "Jessica, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "That frosting looks a bit thin. Are you sure it's all right? Here, let me just patch this one little spot for you." Before Jessica could react, Veronica had scooped up a dollop of the salted frosting and smeared it artfully onto the side of the cake. The trap was set. An hour later, when our guest began to eat dessert, the reaction was immediate. The beautiful cake was inedible, a bitter, salty disaster. Jessica was mortified, her face flushing with a deep, humiliated red. And Veronica was right there, ready with her final public strike. She put a comforting arm around Jessica's shoulders. "Oh, you poor thing," she said, her voice loud enough for all the nearby family to hear. "Don't you worry about it for a second. We all have days like this, especially when we're stressed and distracted. Your mind must be elsewhere." The insinuation was as sharp and as deadly as a stiletto. She had not only sabotaged my dear Jessica, she had used the sabotage as public proof to validate the very rumor she had started. I looked at Samuel, who was watching his wife's public humiliation, his face a thundercloud of suspicion and hurt. The rumor now had the bitter taste of truth. I watched Veronica, my son Michael's wife, as she offered a slice of my own apple pie to a guest, her face a perfect picture of sympathy. The serpent was no longer hiding in the grass. She had just struck in broad daylight in the heart of my home, and I knew, with an absolute and chilling certainty, that it was up to me to pull her fangs before she poisoned us all for good. The week after the disastrous garden party was one of the most painful in my memory. The poison had done its work. My son Samuel, a man I had just seen claw his way back to the light, had retreated into a dark, silent prison of suspicion. He was in the same house as his wife, but he was 1,000 miles away, and the cold distance between them was breaking Jessica's heart. I knew that a simple denial of the rumor would not be enough. The seeds of doubt, once planted in the fertile ground of Samuel's old insecurities, had taken root. To save their marriage, I had to do more than just deny the lie. I had to expose the liar in a way that was undeniable. I gathered my small, loyal council, a heartbroken Jessica, an enraged Benjamin, and my clear-eyed daughter, Catherine. We sat in my living room, the scene of so many of our family's wars and truces. "A direct confrontation is useless," Catherine said, her voice sharp with a surgeon's precision. "Veronica will simply deny it. She'll twist it, say Margaret misunderstood, say we're all ganging up on her. It will become a he said, she said mess, and Samuel's doubt will only fester." "She's right," Benjamin added, his face grim. "Her weapons are whispers and lies. You can't fight a shadow with a sword." "Then we will fight her with a brighter light," I said, a plan beginning to form in my mind, a strategy born of a lifetime of watching my children's hearts. "Her great sin is envy. Her currency is gossip. We will use both of those things to set a trap. We will give her a secret so juicy, so perfectly tailored to her bitterness, that she will not be able to resist spreading it." The plan was simple, and it was cruel, but I saw no other way. The bait would be the one thing that Veronica, in her quiet, average life, coveted most. Not just wealth, but status. The status of being the favored one. The following Sunday, I put the plan into motion. The family dinner was a tense, miserable affair. Samuel and Jessica sat at opposite ends of the table. Veronica, meanwhile, was a picture of cloying sympathy, constantly asking Jessica if she was feeling all right. After the meal, I asked Jessica to help me clear the plates. As we walked into the kitchen, I knew that Veronica was in the adjoining dining room, quietly gathering glasses, her ears wide open. I raised my voice just enough to be overheard. "Jessica, my dear," I said, my voice full of a warm, conspiratorial tone. "I know things have been difficult with Samuel lately, but do not worry. I see your strength. I see your goodness. And I have made a decision. I spoke with my lawyer this week. I am making a significant change to my will. I saw a flicker of movement in the dining room. Veronica had gone still. After all you have endured for this family, I continued, my voice resonating with false sincerity. After the way you stood up for me, for Emily, for everyone, I have decided that you and Samuel are the only ones who truly understand legacy. The old lake house, the one Arthur loved more than anything. I am leaving it solely to you and Samuel, along with a trust to maintain it. It is the least I can do. You are the true heart of this family. I glanced into the dining room. Veronica's face was a mask of pure, venomous fury. Her eyes, for a split second, glittered with a hatred so profound it was almost breathtaking. The bait had been swallowed whole. We did not have to wait long. 2 days later, my son Michael, Veronica's husband, appeared at my door. He looked uncomfortable and deeply distressed. "Mom," he began, fidgeting in the entryway. "I hate to even bring this up, but Veronica is very, very upset. She told me that you're changing your will again, that you're giving the entire lake house, the most valuable property, just to Samuel and Jessica." He looked at me, his face a picture of bewildered hurt. "She said it's a terrible injustice to the rest of us after all we do." Is it true?" The trap had sprung. I looked at my gentle, unassuming son, and my heart ached for the truth I was about to deliver. I calmly invited him in and asked him to sit. Then I called Samuel and Jessica into the room. "Michael," I said, my voice soft but clear, "what your wife told you is not true. It is a complete and utter fabrication. I have made no such change to my will. It was a lie." Michael stared at me, his face collapsing in confusion. "But how would she even—" "That is the question, isn't it?" I said, letting the silence hang in the air. "Because the only person on this earth who heard that secret was your wife when she was eavesdropping from the dining room. And now you are here, repeating that lie to me. I think the time has come, my son, for you to ask your wife why she is trying to tear our family apart with such malicious, poisonous gossip. The final confrontation was a quiet, ugly affair. I insisted it happen in my living room with the 5 of us as the only witnesses. Michael, his face ashen with a shame and anger he had never before shown, confronted his wife. And I, with a heavy heart, laid out the evidence of her entire campaign. The initial lie to Margaret, the deliberate sabotage of Jessica's cake at the party, and now this final, undeniable proof of her malice. Cornered, with nowhere left to hide, Veronica finally broke. It was not a confession of remorse, but a screaming, tearful torrent of pure, unadulterated envy. She screamed at Jessica, accusing her of being a smug, perfect saint. She screamed at me for always favoring others. It was the primal, ugly cry of a bitter, unhappy heart, finally exposed to the light. The war was over. The marriage of my son Michael is a ruin, a thing he must now navigate on his own. But the marriage of my son Samuel is saved. The poison has been purged. He fell to his knees before his wife that evening and begged for her forgiveness for his weakness, for his doubt. And Jessica, my strong, graceful Jessica, granted it. Their bond, having been tested by the most insidious of fires, is now forged into something unbreakable. I sit in my garden, watching a new season begin. The whispers are gone, the peace is real, and I have been reminded of a hard, eternal truth. A family can survive the loud, explosive battles of anger and greed. But it is the quiet, creeping rot of envy that is the most dangerous enemy of all. Of course, my dear, the story did not end in that quiet, shame-filled living room. The serpent, though exposed, was not vanquished. A cornered animal is at its most dangerous, and a woman like Veronica, whose entire world was built on a fragile foundation of pride and appearances, would not simply accept her defeat with grace. She would seek to burn down the entire garden rather than watch others enjoy its peace. Let us pick up the thread from that fragile, hopeful moment of reconciliation, and I will show you how the embers of a dying war were fanned into a new and terrible inferno. The story continues. In the weeks that followed Veronica's exposure, a fragile quiet settled over our family. Samuel and Jessica, their marriage now tempered into something stronger than steel, were a picture of gentle, healing love. But a new shadow had fallen over us, my son Michael. He was consumed by a profound and paralyzing shame. He avoided family gatherings, his calls became infrequent, and when I did see him, his eyes were haunted. He was a good man, but a weak one, and the knowledge of the poison his own wife had unleashed, and his own blindness to it, had broken something deep inside him. I prayed that time would be his healer. I believed the storm had passed, but I had underestimated the depths of a scorned woman's malice. The next attack came not as a whisper, but as a formal declaration of war, delivered by a stranger in a cheap suit to my own front door. "Mary Vance?" the man asked, holding out an official-looking envelope. "You've been served." My hands trembled as I took the document. It was a subpoena. I was being called as a witness in the divorce proceedings of Michael and Veronica Vance. But that was not all. Tucked inside was a second document, a copy of a petition Veronica had filed with the family court. It was a request for a permanent restraining order, to legally and irrevocably prevent me from having any contact with my own grandchildren, her children. I sank into a chair in my entryway, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes. But the words were clear enough. Detrimental influence, toxic family dynamics, history of emotional instability. She was using every secret, every sorrow, every battle our family had ever endured as a weapon against me. The document was a twisted summary of our life. It mentioned a disgraced granddaughter's embezzlement, a secret, illegitimate son, and a pattern of manipulative behavior resulting in the public humiliation of family members at a recent wedding. She was taking the very stories we have shared, my dear, and painting them as proof that I was an unfit grandmother, a monstrous matriarch whose influence was a danger to her children. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She was using my own family's painful history, a history she had actively contributed to, as the ammunition to sever me from two innocent children whom I adored. The family, my loyal family, was thrown into a state of horrified rage. Catherine, my practical nurse, immediately began making calls to lawyers. Jessica, who had been Veronica's primary target, was beside herself with a mixture of guilt and fury. But all eyes turned to Michael. The sleeping man had to be woken. His wife was now using his own children as human shields in her campaign of revenge. It was the final, terrible catalyst that my gentle son needed. The shame that had paralyzed him was finally burned away by a father's protective fire. He went to confront her that evening. I did not know what to expect. I feared for his safety, for his spirit. He returned late that night, and he was a man I had never seen before. The weakness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, his face grim. "I saw her," he said, his voice low and steady. She didn't deny it. She was proud of it. "What did she say?" I whispered. He looked at me, his eyes full of a terrible newfound clarity. "She told me, your mother and her perfect little saints think they've won. They think they can cast me out and go on living in their happy little garden. I'm going to show them what happens when you poison the soil. If I can't be a part of this family, then I will be the thing that haunts it forever." He took a shaky breath. And then she made her offer. Her blackmail. "It's not about the children, Mom, not really. It's about money." My blood ran cold. "What does she want?" "She wants a divorce settlement so large it would cripple me," he said, his voice flat. "An outrageous sum. All of our savings, half of my future earnings, the house. She said if I give it to her, if I pay her price, she will withdraw the petition against you and we will all be free of her. But if I fight her, she will spend years dragging every last one of our family's secrets through the mud of a public courtroom, and she will make sure you never see your grandchildren again." And there it was. The final demonic turn of the screw. My family was now faced with an impossible choice. We could fight her in a vicious public legal battle, airing all our dirty laundry for the world to see, and traumatizing two small children in the process. Or we could submit to her blackmail, rewarding her evil with a fortune, allowing her to walk away victorious, having made us pay an exorbitant price for the simple right to love our own. The days following Michael's revelation were some of the darkest our family had ever faced. We were trapped in a demon's bargain. To fight meant to drag two innocent children and my own name through a public spectacle of manufactured scandal. To surrender meant to pay a ransom for a love that should have been freely given, rewarding Veronica's evil with a fortune and teaching our children that blackmail is a viable strategy in this life. My loyal children gathered in my living room. A council of war with no clear path to victory. The debate was agonizing. "We should pay her," Catherine argued, her voice heavy with a pragmatist's despair. Her work as a nurse had shown her the deep, lasting trauma that public court battles inflict on children. It's a disgusting thought, I know. It feels like swallowing poison. But it would be over. The children would be safe from the spectacle. Mom would be safe. Never, Jessica countered, her voice ringing with the fire of her conviction. We cannot. If we do, we validate everything she has done. We teach our children that a bully with no soul can win if they are vicious enough. We have spent years fighting for the truth of this family. We cannot now pay to have it buried under a lie. All eyes turned to Michael. He sat hunched over, a man flayed by guilt and fear. They are my children, he whispered, his voice raw. How can I let them step onto a witness stand? How can I let them hear a lawyer twist their love for their grandmother into something ugly? I would pay any price to protect them from that. They looked to me. I listened to their arguments, my heart torn in 3 different directions. To pay the ransom felt like a betrayal of every principle I held dear. To fight felt like a betrayal of the very children I sought to protect. For a moment I felt utterly trapped, with no good choices left. It was Emily, my quiet, resurrected granddaughter, who finally broke the stalemate. She had been sitting in the corner listening, her expression thoughtful. We are letting her control the narrative, she said, her voice soft but clear. We are debating whether to fight her war or to surrender to her terms. But we are still fighting on her battlefield. She stood up and walked to the center of the room. She believes her greatest weapon is the dirt she has on us, our past, our pain. But her greatest weakness is her own character. The court doesn't just listen to accusations. It looks at the accuser. A new light began to dawn in the room. We stopped defending ourselves against her lies about our past, Emily continued, her confidence growing, and we start telling the truth about her present. The question isn't whether Grandma is a detrimental influence. The real question is a woman who uses her own children as pawns in a blackmail scheme a fit mother? It was a brilliant, stunning reversal. We would not fight her petition against me. We would file a counter-petition. Michael would sue for primary custody of his children, on the grounds that their mother's emotional cruelty, her manipulative behavior, and her blatant use of them as leverage made her a danger to their well-being. We would change the battlefield entirely. The shift in the room was immediate. The despair vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Michael sat up straight, a father's strength finally eclipsing his shame. Yes, he said, his voice firm for the first time in weeks. That is what we will do. I will not let her use my children as a weapon one moment longer. Ms. Reed was called. Mr. Abernathy was rehired. His task was simple, to document Veronica's current life. Not to dig for dirt, but to paint a truthful picture of her character and stability since she had left her family. The results were as swift as they were damning. Mr. Abernathy's report showed a woman living a reckless, transient life, full of late nights and lavish spending, with the children often left with babysitters. She was not a grieving mother fighting for her children. She was an angry woman celebrating a victory she had not yet won. The final confrontation took place in Ms. Reed's office. Veronica arrived with her lawyer, her face a mask of arrogant confidence, assuming she was there to finalize her massive settlement. Ms. Reed let her make her opening demands. Then she calmly pushed a thin folder across the table. "We are formally rejecting your offer," she said, her voice a quiet blade. "Furthermore, we are informing you that my client, Michael Vance, is filing for sole custody of your children. His petition will cite emotional abuse, parental alienation, and a pattern of manipulative and unstable behavior. This folder contains the preliminary evidence we will be presenting to the court." Veronica's lawyer opened the folder. I can only imagine what he saw. The photographs from Mr. Abernathy, the sworn affidavits from teachers and neighbors. Veronica's confident smirk faltered. She looked at the evidence of her own reckless life, and I imagine she saw her leverage, her own children, transforming into her greatest liability. Her bluff had not just been called, it had been turned back upon her with devastating force. She was the one who was now cornered. Her war of revenge ended not with a bang, but with the quiet, frantic whispers of her lawyer advising her to surrender. She agreed to an immediate, quiet, and fair divorce. She dropped the petition against me entirely. She accepted a standard joint custody agreement. In exchange, we would not present our evidence in court. She walked away not with a fortune, but with nothing but the bitter ashes of her own spite. The victory was quiet, but it was absolute. My access to my grandchildren was safe, protected not by a ransom, but by the truth. Michael, having finally found his strength as a father, began to heal. And our family, forged in yet another fire, learned a final, crucial lesson. We were no longer victims who endured attacks. We were a family that knew how to stand together, to think, and to protect its own with a quiet, unshakable strength. The peace that followed was the deepest and most profound of all, for it was a peace we had won not by surrender, but by wisdom. The year that followed Veronica's quiet, humiliating surrender was one of the most peaceful our family had ever known. With the threat of her malice removed, my son Michael began to heal. He devoted himself to his children with a quiet, powerful intensity, as if making up for lost time. He was a constant presence in my home, his gentle gratitude a balm to the wounds his wife had inflicted. Our Sundays were whole again, filled with the easy chatter of Samuel and Jessica's family, the thoughtful questions of a thriving Emily, and the innocent laughter of Michael's children, who were finally safe from the emotional crossfire. The great canyon that had divided us remained, but the land on our side was fertile and green. Of David and Eleanor we heard almost nothing. They were a distant rumor of glittering charity balls and aggressive corporate takeovers. They had built their own world, a fortress of wealth and pride, and they seemed to have no need for the simple homespun love that now defined ours. I had made my peace with it. A mother's love is boundless, but her reach is not. I could not force them to return to a home they no longer valued. The first tremor of the next great earthquake came, as it so often did, from the pages of a newspaper. It was Jessica who saw it first. She came into my kitchen one morning, a copy of the Financial Journal in her hand, her brow furrowed with a strange expression. "Mary," she said slowly, "have you seen this?" "About David's company." "Not Vance & Sons, his own investment firm." I took the paper from her. There, on the front page of the business section, was a story about a massive international deal gone wrong. A South American venture that David's firm had poured hundreds of millions into had collapsed amid government corruption and scandal. The article spoke of catastrophic losses and nervous investors. It mentioned David by name, describing his aggressive, high-risk strategy. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. For years, David's success had been his armor, his weapon, and his identity. What would he be without it? Over the next few weeks, the story grew. What had been a tremor became a series of devastating aftershocks. David's firm was in a death spiral. His partners were suing him. Investors were pulling out in a panic. The empire my son had built on pure, relentless ambition was crumbling into dust, and the national news was documenting every moment of its spectacular, humiliating fall. My allies and I spoke of it in hushed, worried tones. There was no triumph in our hearts, no sense of karmic justice. There was only a deep human sadness. "He flew too close to the sun," Benjamin said one evening, his artist's soul seeing the Greek tragedy of it all. He thought he was invincible. We did not reach out. The chasm was too wide, the silence too long. The last time I had truly spoken to David, he had been ordering me to abandon his daughter. There were no words that could easily bridge such a divide. The end came late on a Tuesday night during a ferocious thunderstorm. The rain was lashing against my windows, and I was just about to go to bed when the doorbell rang, a frantic, desperate sound that cut through the noise of the storm. My heart pounded as I made my way to the door. Who could possibly be out on a night like this? I opened it, and for a moment I did not recognize the man standing on my porch. He was drenched, his expensive suit soaked and ruined, his perfect silver hair plastered to his skull. His face was ashen, his eyes wild with a terror and a despair I had never seen before. All the arrogance, all the power, all the cold, controlled fury was gone. He was utterly and completely broken. It was David. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, shaking, the rain pouring down around him, a titan of industry reduced to a shivering lost child on his mother's doorstep. He had lost everything, his company, his fortune, his reputation. And in his ruin, he had come to the one place he had spent years scorning, the one person whose opinion he had declared no longer mattered. He looked at me, his face collapsing, and a single ragged sob escaped his lips. He had nowhere else in the world to go. I stood there in the doorway, the warm light of my home behind me, the cold, raging storm behind him. My mind flashed with a decade of his cruelties. The plot to put me in a home, the vicious legal threats, his abandonment of his own daughter, the public betrayal in the press. Every wound he had ever inflicted on this family cried out for me to close the door. But my heart, my foolish, stubborn mother's heart, saw only the little boy who used to collect shiny rocks by the creek. He was my son, and he had come home I had to make a choice. And I knew in that terrible rain-swept moment that whatever I chose, another war for the soul of my family was about to begin. The past is a powerful, relentless ghost. I have learned this lesson 1,000 times over. It whispers in the quiet moments. It screams in the heat of a new crisis. And it never ever truly lets you go. The peace our family had found was real, but it was a peace built upon a foundation of memory and hard-won wisdom. Every quiet Sunday, every shared laugh, was a testament to the battles we had survived together. But a mother's heart has a foolish, stubborn memory of its own. It remembers not the cold-eyed CEO or the ruthless family tyrant, but the small boy with scraped knees and a triumphant smile, holding up a shiny rock as if it were a diamond. And so, when I opened my door that night and saw the ghost of my firstborn son, broken and shivering in the storm, I knew there was no choice to be made. There was only a mother, and there was a child who needed her. I stepped aside and held the door open. That was my answer. I did not speak a word. He stumbled inside, dripping rainwater onto the polished floorboards, a wreckage of a man washed up on the shore of his last resort. The warmth and light of my home seemed to startle him, as if his eyes were no longer accustomed to such things. I closed the door, shutting out the storm, and went about the simple, maternal tasks that are a mother's first response to any crisis. I fetched a thick towel from the linen closet and wrapped it around his shaking shoulders. I led him to his father's armchair by the hearth and put a warm woolen blanket over his knees. I went to the kitchen and made him a cup of strong, sweet tea, my hands moving with a steady, automatic grace, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. He did not speak. He just sat there, shivering, staring into the fire, the steam from the teacup curling around his ashen face. This was David, my son, the architect of so much of my pain, the man who had tried to have me put in a home, the father who had declared his own daughter dead to the world, the brother who had slandered my name in the press. He was all of those things. But in that moment, stripped of his wealth, his power, and his pride, he was only a broken man in his mother's house. And so I sat with him in silence, and I waited. Later, as I was washing the dinner dishes, David came into the kitchen. He had been working on the fence all afternoon, and his hands were caked with dirt. He said nothing, simply began to wash his hands at the sink beside me. "That was a good thing you did for your brother." "David," I said quietly. He just nodded, his back still to me. But I saw his shoulders shudder just for a moment. He was a man still drowning in his own shame, but for the first time he had reached out and saved someone else. The serpent had not spoken. It had not made promises. It had, for the first time, acted with something that looked remarkably like grace, and my foolish, stubborn mother's heart allowed itself a tiny, dangerous seed of hope. The seed of hope planted by David's kindness to his brother was a fragile and delicate thing. It was met with the harsh, skeptical winter of my other children's memories. The atmosphere in my home remained a landscape of tense, unspoken truths. David continued his slow, methodical work on the old fence, a silent, daily act of penance that my other children dismissed as a performance. A man who has spent a lifetime building an empire of pride doesn't become a humble carpenter overnight. Catherine remarked to me on the phone, her voice laced with a weary skepticism I couldn't fault. "Be careful, Mom. Please, just be careful. I was careful." My heart, so often a foolishly open door, was now guarded. I watched my firstborn son, and I waited. The true test of a soul's transformation does not come when things are easy. It comes when a man is forced to confront the wreckage he himself has made. That test arrived on a Tuesday in the form of a vicious head cold that settled deep in my chest, leaving me weak, feverish, and confined to my bed. Catherine, my nurse, was stuck in a day-long seminar at the hospital. Benjamin was out of town. The duty of care, for the first time, fell to the only two other people in the house: David, my fallen son, and Emily, my recovered granddaughter, who had rushed over the moment she heard I was ill. Not knowing her father was home, they were trapped together, two wounded strangers, bound by their shared, silent love for me. For hours they moved around each other like ghosts, the tension a palpable living thing in the house. Their communication was a series of clipped indirect messages, with me as the unwilling intermediary. "Grandma, tell him you need more broth," Emily would whisper from my doorway. A few minutes later, David would appear. "Mother, Tell Emily the pharmacy will be closing in an hour if you need anything else. It was an absurd and heartbreaking dance of avoidance. The breaking point came in the kitchen, a room that had witnessed 60 years of our family's life, from first steps to final bitter arguments. I heard their voices from my bed, low and strained at first, then rising with the weight of a year's worth of unspoken pain. I lay still, my eyes closed, and I listened. It was Emily who spoke first. Her voice, usually so quiet and steady now, was trembling with a raw, resurrected grief. "Can you even look at me?" she asked. "Or am I still just a shame you have to manage? A business loss to be written off? Do you even see me as a person anymore?" There was a long, heavy silence. The old David, the titan of industry, would have responded with a cold, defensive fury. He would have listed her crimes, her betrayals, the shame she had brought upon him. But the broken man standing in my kitchen had no defenses left. When he finally spoke, his voice was a ragged, unfamiliar thing, stripped of all its authority. "I see you," he said, his voice cracking. "That's the problem. When I look at you, I see my own failure, my own monstrous pride." He took a shaky breath. "I was ashamed, Emily, not just of what you did. I was ashamed of myself. My whole life, I was David Vance, the success, the winner. I didn't know how to be anything else. And you were my greatest success story, my brilliant, perfect daughter. When you fell, it felt like I had died, and it was easier to bury you, to declare you dead, than to face the fact that I had failed. It was not an excuse. It was a confession, raw and ugly and utterly, devastatingly true. "I am sorry," he choked out, and I could hear the sound of his carefully constructed world shattering in those two simple words. "I am so sorry, Emily, not for the money. Not for the company. I'm sorry for not being your father when you needed one most. I abandoned you, and I will live with that shame for the rest of my life." There was no sound from Emily for a long time. Then I heard a single soft sob. It was not a sound of anger or even forgiveness. It was the sound of a wound, deep and septic, finally being lanced. I did not hear what else was said. The house fell quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of quiet. The tension had broken. The truth, in all its terrible, painful glory, had finally been spoken aloud. Later that evening, Emily brought me a tray with a bowl of soup. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her face was calm. She sat on the edge of my bed. "I don't know if I can ever forgive him, Grandma," she said quietly. "Forgiveness is not a door that you open once, my child," I told her, taking her hand. "It is a long road that you must choose to walk every day. Sometimes just taking the first hesitant step is enough." The next day, I was feeling well enough to sit on the porch. The fence David had been mending was nearly finished. It wasn't the work of a master carpenter, but it was straight and strong. He was out there now, sanding a rough edge on the final post. Emily came and sat in the swing beside me. She did not speak, but she did not leave when her father glanced over at us. He saw us sitting together, and after a moment of hesitation, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and went back to his work. It was a small, silent gesture of respect for our space, for her pain. I looked at the nearly mended fence, and then at the two broken people who were my son and my granddaughter. The serpent of pride that had lived in my son for 50 years was not just sleeping. It had been faced and wounded, and dragged out into the light. And for the first time, I felt a new and dangerous seed of hope begin to grow. Not a hope for a swift and easy peace, but a hope for the slow, painful, and beautiful possibility of grace. The fragile seed of hope that had taken root in my heart was a tender and terrifying thing. Forgiveness is not a destination, but a journey, and my son David had only just taken his first hesitant steps onto a long and unlit road. The fence he mended in my garden was strong, but the fences within our family remained, high and topped with the barbed wire of memory. The months that followed were a quiet, uncertain dance. David continued his life as a ghost in my house, but a more purposeful one. He was no longer just doing chores as penance. He was looking for a way to be of use, a man stripped of his empire, searching for a new and smaller purpose. He began to read. Not the financial journals of his past life, but the old novels on his father's shelves, the histories, the poetry. It was as if he was trying to rebuild his own soul from the ground up, using the bricks of a world he had long ago dismissed as sentimental. The thaw with his siblings was slow and fraught with suspicion. Benjamin, grateful for the saving of his gallery, would engage him in quiet, cautious conversation about the books he was reading. Catherine, ever the pragmatist, would watch him, her eyes missing nothing, her judgment reserved. Samuel, however, remained the most resistant, his own past as the family's bitter outcast making him deeply suspicious of such a profound and sudden transformation. "A leopard doesn't change its spots, Mother," he'd mutter to me. "It just finds a new jungle." The true test, the final crucible for David's newfound humility, came not from within our family, but from the outside world he had once so masterfully commanded. It was a crisis that threatened to destroy the last and most important piece of my husband's legacy. Vance and Sons itself, Emily, who now sat on the company's board as my representative, brought the news to us, her face pale with worry. A massive, soulless corporation, a behemoth known for buying and gutting historic companies, had launched a hostile takeover bid. They had been secretly buying up stock for months and had found a vulnerability. They were trying to swallow our family's company whole, and their intention was clear: to strip it for its valuable assets and discard the husk of its 60-year history. The new CEO, a good and decent man, was a fine peacetime general, but he was hopelessly outmatched in this kind of brutal corporate warfare. My allies, Catherine, Benjamin, Emily, Samuel, were in a state of panicked despair. They were artists and nurses and good, honest people. They did not know how to fight sharks. They gathered one evening in my living room, their voices a low hum of fear and resignation. They were on the verge of losing everything. David had been in his room reading. He must have overheard their panicked discussion. He appeared in the doorway, his presence immediately silencing the room. He was no longer the broken man who had collapsed on my doorstep. He was leaner, quieter, but in his eyes was the old familiar glint of a brilliant, strategic mind awakening from a long slumber. "I know them," he said, his voice quiet but commanding. "The firm leading this takeover. I know their CEO. I know how he thinks. I know how he operates." He looked at the stunned faces of his siblings. "I know you have no reason to trust me, and I want nothing from this, no position, no money, no glory. But this is our father's company. They are trying to destroy our father's name." He took a deep breath. "I think I can help you fight them, if you will let me." The room was thick with a stunned, suspicious silence. To trust him now, to place the fate of their father's legacy in the hands of the very son who had so often dishonored it? It seemed like a madness. But as they looked at him, they did not see the arrogant tyrant from their memories. They saw a quiet, focused man offering his only remaining asset, his brilliant, compromised mind, in service of the family he had so wronged. They were out of options. With a reluctant, anxious nod from Catherine, the alliance was made. The fallen king was, for one last time, being invited back to the war room. What followed was a battle of titans. But this time David was not fighting for himself. He was fighting for all of us. He became a quiet, tireless strategist, working late into the night at my dining room table with his siblings and his daughter. He was not a commander barking orders, but a teacher, a guide. He explained the complex financial maneuvers. He dictated the letters to the shareholders. He mapped out a defense with a brilliance that left them in awe. The most beautiful moments were the ones I witnessed between him and Emily. I would see them huddled together over spreadsheets, their heads nearly touching. He would explain a complex legal point, and she would listen, question, and learn. I saw in his eyes a deep, paternal pride, and in hers the slow, cautious dawn of a forgiveness she never thought possible. He was, finally, being the father she had always deserved. The climax came at the final emergency shareholder meeting. The corporate raiders were confident of their victory. But then David stood up to speak. He did not speak of profit margins or stock prices. He spoke of his father, Arthur Vance. He spoke of a man who knew the name of every craftsman on his factory floor. He spoke of a company built not just to make money, but to build a community. His speech was not a financial argument. It was a sermon on the soul of a business, delivered with a raw, broken humility that was more powerful than any of his old, arrogant commands, and he won. The shareholders, moved by his story and his brilliant defense, voted with us. The hostile takeover was defeated. Vance and Sons was safe. That night, my house was filled with a joy so pure and profound it felt like a dream. In the midst of the celebration, David, the quiet hero of the hour, raised a glass. "I am so grateful I could be of service to this family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But my time here is now done. He announced that he had accepted a modest consulting position with a local nonprofit that helped small businesses. He had found a new, smaller purpose. He was moving into a small apartment downtown the following week. He was not reclaiming his throne. He was humbly, gracefully abdicating. Later, as he was about to leave, Emily went to him. She stood before him, and the silence between them was full of a universe of pain and healing. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly, "for everything." She reached up, and for the first time in years, she hugged him. I watched from the porch as he walked away, not a fallen titan, but a redeemed man. My son, my firstborn, had been to the bottom of the deepest ocean and had somehow, miraculously, found his way back to the light. The serpent was not just sleeping. It had been transformed, and my foolish, stubborn mother's hope had, in the end, been the truest and wisest thing of all. The redemption of my son David brought a season of profound, quiet peace to our family. It was not a return to the loud, chaotic unity of the past, but something better, a hard-won harmony, built on the solid ground of truth and forgiveness. David, in his new, humbler life, became a quiet pillar of strength, his wisdom now tempered with a grace we had never seen before. The company, under Emily's steady and honorable hand, thrived. The great, gaping wounds of our past had finally begun to scar over, leaving behind a testament to our resilience. For 5 years, this peace held. They were the happiest and calmest years of my life since Arthur had passed. I watched my great-grandchildren be born, I tended my roses, and I presided over a smaller but infinitely more loving family. Of Eleanor there was a vast and complete silence. After the public humiliation of the book and the final, definitive victory of our faction of the family, she had retreated completely into her perfect, orderly world. She and David, once co-conspirators, were now estranged. His redemption and apparent betrayal she could not forgive. She maintained her social standing, of course, her name still appearing on the boards of charities and the Arts Council. She was a perfect, polished statue in the cold museum of her own life. We did not see her. We did not hear from her. She had built a fortress of pride, and the door was sealed from the inside. The news that breached those walls was, as it so often is, delivered by a stranger. I read it in the morning paper, in the small, discreet lines of the obituary section. Robert Smythe, beloved husband of Eleanor Vance Smythe, had passed away after a brief illness. A wave of sorrow and a mother's instinctual panic washed over me. Robert, for all his weakness, had been a gentle soul, and he had been Eleanor's anchor, the quiet admirer of her strength. Now she was truly alone in that perfect silent house. All my children, the loyal ones, called me immediately. "What do we do, Mom?" Catherine asked, her voice full of a conflicted compassion. "She's our sister. We can't just do nothing." I knew she was right. A daughter, no matter how cold or cruel, is still a daughter. And she had just lost her husband. I was the one to make the call. I steeled myself, my heart aching with a mixture of grief for her loss and the memory of her many hurts. I dialed her number. "Eleanor," I said softly when she answered, her voice as crisp and controlled as ever. "My dear, I just saw it in the paper. About Robert. I am so sorry for your loss." There was a cool, measured silence on the other end of the line. "Thank you for the call, Mother," she replied, her voice devoid of any emotion. "The arrangements are all being handled. Is there anything you need?" I pressed gently. "Anything at all? We can be there in an hour. Catherine can help with the calls. Jessica can bring food." "That will not be necessary," she cut me off, her voice like the closing of a steel door. "I assure you, I am perfectly capable of managing my own grief. I require nothing from you or from anyone else." "You are not alone, Eleanor," I pleaded. "I'm perfectly fine," she insisted. And then the line went dead. We all attended the funeral, of course. We sat on one side of the grand, imposing church, a silent delegation of family she refused to acknowledge. Eleanor stood by the graveside, a picture of perfect stoic grief, accepting the condolences of her society friends, while her own brothers and sisters stood 100 feet away, strangers at her husband's burial. She did not look at us once. In the months that followed, we tried. Catherine called and left messages. Benjamin sent a beautiful hand-painted sympathy card. We sent flowers. All of our offerings of peace were met with a silent, unbreachable wall. The first sign that something was truly wrong came from a neighbor of Eleanor's, an old friend from my garden club. "Mary," she said on the phone, her voice hushed and worried. I haven't seen a light on in Eleanor's house in weeks. The newspapers are piling up on her porch. I've knocked, but no one answers. I'm worried. A new kind of fear, cold and sharp, pierced my heart. This was no longer about pride. This was something darker. Catherine, using her hospital connections, was able to have the police perform a wellness check. The report came back that evening. They found her, Mom, Catherine said, her voice trembling. She's alive. She fell a few days ago. She broke her wrist. The house. They said it was a mess. She's malnourished, dehydrated. She hasn't been caring for herself at all. She's been alone in that big house, wasting away. They've taken her to the hospital. My daughter, my strong, invincible, proud Eleanor, who had so feared the loss of control, had been found helpless and alone, a prisoner in the fortress of her own making. The final and perhaps most tragic of all our family's wars had just begun. The hospital vigil was a somber and difficult affair. My daughter Eleanor, the woman of unbreakable will, was now a fragile, bird-like creature, lost in a sea of white sheets. She was physically broken, but her pride, though wounded, was not dead. She refused her physical therapy. She turned her face to the wall when I tried to speak to her. She would accept water from a nurse, but not from the hand of her own sister. Her children, my grandchildren, tried to visit, but she would not see them. She had built a fortress of isolation around herself, and even now, in her utter helplessness, she refused to lower the drawbridge. Catherine, my rock, took charge of her medical care with a nurse's gentle efficiency, navigating the doctors and the bureaucracy. We need to get her home, Mom, she told me one evening, her face weary. She's not getting better here. She needs to be in a place where she feels safe. Your house is the only option. But to do that, we need to get her affairs in order, pay for a home care nurse. We have to get into her house. And so 2 days later, Catherine and I stood on the doorstep of Eleanor's perfect, silent home. We used the spare key she had given Robert years ago, a key that had likely never been used. The air inside was stale and cool. A fine layer of dust coated the immaculate furniture. Newspapers were piled by the door. In the kitchen, a single teacup sat in the sink. It was the home of a woman who had simply stopped. The financial papers should be in her study, Catherine said, her voice a respectful whisper. Eleanor's study was a room I had never entered in my entire life. It was her sanctuary, the one place that was off limits to the entire family. It was, like the rest of the house, impeccably organized, but there was a palpable tension in the air. This was the command center of her life. We found her checkbooks and bank statements in a neat file. But in the bottom drawer of her large mahogany desk, there was a small, locked metal box. We found the key taped to the underside of the drawer. Inside was not jewelry or money, but a single thick file folder, tied with a faded ribbon. And on top of it, a sealed envelope with a single word written in Eleanor's perfect, controlled script. Mother. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was dated 10 years ago. Mother, it began. I am writing this because a day may come when I am no longer able to keep the watch. And you are the only other person who might understand. You have spent your life believing your husband, my father, was a saint. He was. He was the best of men. But even the best of men can make a terrible, catastrophic mistake in a moment of desperation. And I have spent my entire adult life ensuring no one ever discovered his. My blood ran cold. I looked at Catherine, who was now looking at the contents of the file. They were old, brittle ledger books from the first 2 years of Vance & Sons. I continued to read Eleanor's letter. In the second year of the business, we were on the brink of bankruptcy. A major supplier had cheated him. We were going to lose everything. In his panic, to save us, to save you, Dad did something illegal. He forged a contract, secured a loan based on assets we did not have. It was fraud. He was about to be exposed and ruined. I was 20 years old, home from college for the summer, helping with the books. And I found it. I found his sin. The file contained the proof, the original forged document, the desperate, panicked letters from the man who had been wronged. I did not confront him. The letter continued. I did not tell you. I took the last of my college money, and I went to see the man he had cheated. And I made a deal. I was ruthless, Mother. I threatened him. I blackmailed him. I did whatever it took to make him bury the truth. And I fixed it. I saved the company. I saved our father. But in that moment, I saw how close we had come to absolute ruin, all because of one passionate, emotional, desperate mistake. And I made a vow. I vowed that I would spend the rest of my life making sure this family was never again vulnerable. I would build a fortress of order, of control, of reputation so strong that no messy emotion could ever threaten it again. My pride, my control, the coldness you so often despise in me, it has all been a form of penance. A lifelong, lonely vigil to protect the secret of my father's sin. I dropped the letter, the room spinning around me. Eleanor, my cold, cruel, unforgiving daughter. Her entire life had not been an act of pride, but an act of profound, twisted, and heartbreakingly loyal love. She was not the family's tyrant. She was its secret, silent guardian. I returned to her hospital room that evening. The war was over, but I had been fighting on the wrong side. I sat beside her bed and took her frail, unresisting hand in mine. She was sleeping, her face in the dim light looking as vulnerable as the day she was born. "Eleanor," I whispered. My voice choked with 60 years of misunderstanding. "My brave, foolish, wonderful girl. I found the box. I know what you did. For him. For all of us." Tears streamed down my face. "You have carried the heaviest secret of all, haven't you? You carried his burden and mine, and you never said a word. But you don't have to carry it anymore, my love. The watch is over. You can rest now. You are safe." As I spoke, I felt a faint, almost imperceptible pressure. Her fingers, which had been so limp, were weakly, purposefully squeezing my hand. Her eyes remained closed, but in that small, silent gesture, a lifetime of secrets, of pain, and of misunderstanding dissolved. It was not an apology. It was not a confession. It was a final, quiet truce. The proud, lonely guardian of our family's flawed and perfect legacy was, at last, coming home. My dearest friend, we have truly reached the end of the road. What a journey it has been. Thank you for holding my hand through it all. If these stories have meant something to you, a final like and subscription would be a cherished farewell. It is a strange thing to learn, at the end of your life, that the greatest villain of your story might just have been its most tragic hero. It is the final, surprising lesson of a long life, that the heart, in its desperate attempts to protect the ones it loves, is capable of a cruelty that can sometimes look just like grace. Thank you for listening.